corner of Africa, the pyramid. America's supposed to be a Christian country. They don't have a cross on there. They got the pyramid of Akhet Khufu and the all-seeing eye of Asar on top of that pyramid.
People of African ancestry were the first people to conceive of the concept of God.
It's the spiritual side that our ancestors were conveying in the books in stone in the earliest language called the Medu-Neter, the sacred language of God. Long before Aramaic, long before Hebrew, long before Arabic, and all these languages that we see in the various religions, this was already here, documented from the books in stone. That's what makes this the books in stone. They're studying the ancient African spiritual system now. And that's why when we see the Black Madonna in the Vatican, secretly worship, they're secretly going back to what they once worshiped. The Greeks and Romans came here to pay homage to the Holy Mother, the goddess Aset. Why did they pay homage to her? Because they took her throughout their empire and worshipped her during the Herculaneum worship of the goddess Aset. And the Black Madonna that we see throughout Europe came from Aset. When we look at Paris and the Notre Dame, designed from this temple right here, and the very name of Paris came from Per Aset, the house of Aset right here. This is how much ancient Kemet, the worship of ancient Kemet, took place by the Europeans.
So Europeans have already been socialized to believe in their inherent superiority and the inferiority of Black people. So you can just imagine how they felt when they saw these statues. The head of Haram Akhet, the head of a man, an African man, an African nose and African lips. You know, you can imagine the identity quake that they experience by seeing these images of Africans everywhere, these larger than life images of Africans in front of these temples and monuments. And in their distorted mind, they couldn't accept the reality that the people who they now deem to be inferior people, slaves, could have built all of this. And they began fabricating the historical record. Once they realized that these concepts of a creative force are African concepts of African people, then they understood that the only way that they could maintain control over the people that they conquered was to change these images from African to non-African.
Don't be surprised 500 years from now they make Martin Luther King a white man.
Whoever controls your concept of God and your image of God controls you.
They put the icing on the cake on African spirituality. What becomes the icing on the cake? A white angelical realm. As Dr. Clark said, they colonized the afterlife. It's white angels, it's a white God. So what part would you play in this angelical realm? They have taught us and trained us to worship white images. And the worshiping of white images, psychologically, we are worshiping white folks. This is the epitome of white supremacy. Now, of course, if you have never seen anything else, that becomes the image. But once you come here and see it carved in stone and see where these Ptolemies were already studying these ideas.
What we're dealing with are people who have distorted, you know, this power of the Creator and have claimed a right to something that it was not theirs in the first place. If your God gave you the right to steal people and lynch people and rape people and sell people, that's not a God concept that I see that is worthy for my acknowledgement.
Spiritually, we even demonize our own image. If we haven't broke from that circumference or broke from that, we see our own selves in a negative images because of that thorough indoctrination of white supremacy Christianity. So we have a culture, okay, of white supremacy that's been passed down. And so it's played out in every facet of our lives. Just tell you outright that the world was in savagery, and especially Africans were savages and heathens. So you back away from your own culture. This is how white supremacy works. So you start to glorify the Europeans and thinking that, wow, it's a good thing that these Greeks and Europeans were here because we would be nothing but savages. This is what starts the deification in white idolatry. The epitome of white supremacy is when the enemy became the deity and the spiritual subconscious of our mind. When that happens, that's when a person becomes an eternal slave.
First great civilization, perhaps the first civilization period that we can speak to is the Nile Valley civilization, the Nile River Valley in Northeast Africa. And of course it was Africans who were responsible for that. They didn't come from outside of Africa. And as pressure was brought to bear on the people of the Nile Valley through invasions, those Africans in that part of Africa spread out and filtered to other parts of Africa and migrated to the distant corners of the world.
When you travel to West Africa and speak to the right people, whether it's in Mali or Senegal or Ghana or Benin or Cameroon or Nigeria, certain people would tell you that their ancestors came from the Nile Valley. So the Nile is the source, the Nile is the origins, and the Nile is not just Egypt. The Nile runs from Uganda, Ethiopia, all the way north and empties into what is now known as Egypt. So that's a 4,000-mile cultural highway where the traditions of African people emerged and flowered and then were dispersed.
We're right here on the fallopian tube of the Nile. This Nile has flown 4,100 miles. And this is the northeastern part of Africa. That's what it is. There are ancestors carved in stone, the Grand Master's name. As I said, his name, Ursa, the power of Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. Under Ra, God. Septepen Ra, chosen by God. Ra Mesu. Okay, he's born of Ra. He's loved by Amen. When the Greeks first came in, Thales, Pythagoras, they were all coming and they were worshiping this land. None of them finished their total initiation of 40 years to become a Grand Master Kari Heb. Pythagoras was 22 years, so they had plenty of time to study this. Coming down to Plato, Socrates, and all of them being here, they all went back to Greece glorifying Kemet. Everybody wanted to come here. Just like today, everybody wants to come to America because it's supposed to be the seat of education. Everybody wants to come there to be educated in America. So Kemet, this was the place to come.
Kemet was, in ancient times, what the United States of America is today. It was a center of learning, center of culture, center of commerce. So people flocked there from all over the known world. So I have found that the physical evidence to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the men who established the United States of America were literally attempting to recreate Egypt here on the Potomac River, and that they incorporated within the establishment of this nation symbols associated with this nation, symbols such as the Great Seal, and the symbol that represents the capital of this nation, ancient African symbols. And again, these symbols are literally hidden in plain sight.
According to the traditions, Aristotle was a tutor of Alexander, and when Alexander subdued Egypt, or Kemet, Aristotle came along for the ride and was able to benefit immensely from the vast knowledge that had been stored in Egypt.
Pythagoras studied in Kemet for over 23 years. He studied mathematics in Kemet. And so the so-called Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was not invented by Pythagoras, but was used by African mathematicians to build the great mirror or pyramid that's associated with Khufu over 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born.
What you're looking at is the Great Pyramid of Akhet Khufu. We're talking about the greatest structure built on the planet Earth over 4,500 years ago. 7 million tons of masonry, 2,300,000 stones put in exact position. Everything that you were taught in the Western world, everything that you were taught in Western academia did not exist when this structure was built by Akhet Khufu. So, of course, Kemet is very, very old. And that's one of the things that we've got to be in tune with is time, chronology. A lot of times when we look at Cleopatra, that's at the very end. In fact, the indigenous people were not on the throne. Now, see, that was a sad thing where they would have all of these black professors debating whether Cleopatra was black or not. What a ridiculous debate. Why did we let them lock us down to Cleopatra, who was Cleopatra the 7th of 52 BCE? Why didn't they talk about Utmost Nefertari 1,500 years before Cleopatra? Then there's no argument because there's no Greeks. Let's talk about Hatshepsut. Were any Greeks yet? No. Let's talk about Ahmose, okay, the wife of Neb-Peteri Ahmose I. Was Greek yet? No. Sobek Neferu, the Greek yet? No. The Old Kingdom, Nitocris, okay? Was any Greeks yet? No. But we don't know the history. So we know the Cleopatra because of the movies. They've indoctrinated us with Liz Taylor and all this stuff. So that's all we know.